Lindsay, I look forward to the masterclass today, where the objectives and takeaways for the class today are to identify core values to understand personal motivators, learn how to connect career goals to overall actions, understand the type of company that will best align with the individual values, discover key questions to ask in times of indecision, and downloadable valuable exercises to complete to refer back to post masterclass today. So Lindsay, welcome, and I'm turning the stage over to you, my friend.
Yay, thank you, Monica, for this lovely introduction. Alrighty, so we do have a little presentation today, so I'm just going to share my screen and get that going, and we're going to dive right on in. Let's just get this going. There we go. Alrighty, Ruth. So super excited to be here today because we're going to be talking about one of my personal favorite topic ever, and that is values. So today's presentation is all about our voracious values and how to take action that matters to you. Now, why in the world, though, do values matter so much to me? It's not that I just stumbled on them. It's that I actually personally used values to help me go through one of the darkest periods of my life back in 2011. And at the core of that, values helped me to choose to save my own life, move out of my depression, stop purging after a decade of purging, and really just step into who I am and help to make a bigger impact on the world. And that is why values are so important to me and important in the work that I do with being a business consultant specializing in behavior and branding for better cultures. I am an award-winning mental health advocate, a speaker, and an author. But most importantly, I am a human wifey and a dog mom. And those things are what help get me out of bed in connection with my values. So that's not what we're here to talk about me. We're here to talk about what values are, but that is why values are important to me and how I started on this road of the awesomeness power of values. So now we're just learning how to use this. There we go. Today's awesome conversation is really going to be awesome because we're going to actually have this conversation around what the heck values are, how we can determine what our values in action are, what the real power behind connecting our goals to our values is, and how we can use our values for our mindset, our behaviors, and ultimately our actions. But first, my friends, I do have a wee warning about values and their influence. And that is that our emotional reactions, our goals, and our boundaries all stem from our values. So what I mean by that is if you're ever noticing that you're having a conversation with somebody and all of a sudden you feel this rush of emotion go through you, particularly those more unpleasant emotions such as frustration, anger, feelings, chances are it's because one of your own personal core values has been triggered. And understanding that helps you to pause in that moment to understand that what was said had nothing to do with you, but that it did connect with one of your core values so that you can start to respond better. So knowing that, what then are values? Well, our values, by definition, are our underlying beliefs upon which we take aligned action. So knowing this then, what in the world do our values do? Because so many of us don't actually start to understand and learn about values until we're almost forced to look at ourselves and understand, well, what is really important to me? Or even more, we see them in our companies that we work for, and we just see them as fluffy marketing statements that we laugh at because we're not living them. Now, when we understand what our values are, when we understand what our values in action are, and when we understand what the beliefs behind these values are, our values then inform our sense of morals and ethics. They reduce our overwhelm in decision making because we have a clearer understanding of what the right decision in action for us is. Values then support our own sense of self and our personal identity. They give us clarity on which actions to take, and they also connect us with community, whether this be personal or professional, on a much deeper level than what we're used to. So then, why do values matter? That is what they do. Why do they matter? Well, pardon me, at the end of the day, they have the power to harm us and others. It may sound like I'm being a wee bit dramatic, but I'm not, because what happens then is if we don't understand what our own values are, we can end up setting these things called junk values. Now, this is a term that I came across, and it's based on the research of Tim Kasser, and I came across it in Johann Hari's books, Lost Connections. Fantastic book, highly recommend it. But what these values are, these junk values, they are more extrinsically focused, and they're influenced by external forces. These are things like materialism, money, status, things that typically rely on external validation. What happens then is that they're not ours because our personal values intrinsically motivate us. They are ours from within, behind our beliefs. If we're looking at a value that is not ours, that is extrinsically valued, extrinsically, an extrinsic value, we will not be motivated to go after and take action with this value in place. And so what happens then when we have these junk values is we'll set wrong goals for ourselves. So goals, I'm sure that you know, are these desired future states that we are looking to achieve. There's typically a timeline and a clear step that we need to take. And the thing is, goals are very personal. And when we're setting goals that are not aligned with our values, then we will not be intrinsically motivated to move forward when we come up against an obstacle or a challenge in pursuit of this goal. Even more is that if we're setting goals based on other people's values, we'll feel less fulfilled when we actually achieve the goal. Or even worse, we'll feel like we don't even want to start it, which can then send us into that spiral of we feel like a loser, we feel unaccomplished, we just can't get our stuff together to even start achieving this goal that we said that we wanted. And I'm sure many people are feeling that right now because of the goals, the resolutions they set back on January 1st and have not even worked towards. Well, that then begs the question of, well, what value was that goal set on? So if we're working with wrong values, we're setting wrong goals, which then ultimately leads to us having poor boundaries. And these boundaries are the explicit expression of our own needs and our own expectations from other people. These are the things that we put in place to support us in achieving a goal. And when we don't know what our values are, we are more likely to let someone cross them, which again leaves us feeling with that, why did I say yes to this? I should have said no. This isn't what I wanted. And that's not really okay if you're wanting to live in alignment with yourself, if you're wanting to go after a position that you want, if you're wanting to achieve a real specific goal that you're too scared to admit out loud, but you really want it because it aligns with your own personal goals. Now, I absolutely, gosh darn, love this quote. It says, values protect from social contagion. This was said by the brilliant neurosocial psychologist, Dr. Susan David, and I highly recommend her book, which is Emotional Agility. And when I first heard her say this quote, I was listening to a podcast that she was on, I was running, and I heard her say this, and I stopped right in my tracks. Because it was this clarity moment of, oh my goodness, when we are so clear on what our personal values are, we are so much less likely to be swayed by those outside forces that leave us with doubt, with guilt, and a sense of disconnection or even misdirection. Values simply protect us and our identity and how we move forward in life. That's all fine and dandy, but how then in the world do you actually identify your values? Well, there's a few ways. So it comes down to knowing what is important to you. This is very much an internal reflection exercise, understanding what is important to you. It's not a conversation with other people on what's important to all of you. It is what is important to you personally. It comes down to understanding more as well as to when are you yourself feeling most connected, feeling most aligned in your life, feeling as though this is what you were meant to be doing the whole time. When are you in flow? And that is really those moments when you have clarity, when the world just disappears, when time just disappears, and you know what you are doing is having an impact within your own self. From that, you're then able to start to really identify and understand, okay, well, what are the actions that I do in my world that express my values out loud? And even further, you can start to really dig in and understand, well, who or what are you personally in greater service of? So what is your deeper purpose here? How is that impacting the actions that you take in life, which is also reflected in your values? So what I'm going to do is typically when we have more time, we stop and we do this exercise that I'm about to walk us through. Don't worry, because this exercise that we're about to walk through is not achievable, is accessible, there we go, in a download that you'll have access to with a lovely little, what is that called? A URL link. And you'll get that on the next few pages and at the end of this presentation as well. So I'm just going to walk through because that's super fun. So voracious values. So how do you define your values to take action with confidence and clarity? Well, first things first, chances are you're here because you've heard about values, you've walked through some exercises, most likely at some point. And what a lot of the very first start is to take a list of values and narrow them down to 25 values, narrow them down to 15, narrow them down to 10. And then from there, you narrow them down to your top 3 to 5 core values. The exercise that we're walking through, you only do this with those top 3 to 5 core values. From there, you then look at that value, and we're just going to work with one. You look at one of those values and you say, okay, well, what are the actions that I do in my world today that express these? What action am I in flow in? When do I feel really aligned with the actions that connect with this value? And then from there, there's typically a common through thread between all those actions that you've listed, where you're then able to define what that value in your world means for you. And I want to make this very clear, is that you can have the exact same word value as somebody else in your life, and you can have very different definitions. Heck, with a lot of the branding, values work and consulting work that I do with companies, a lot of them end up having that exact same value, particularly in the construction world. There's that safety value that comes up. Every single construction company I've worked with has had that value. Every single construction company has had a different definition. And what's important to note is that neither definition is right or wrong. It's simply understanding what is that definition for that company or for yourself in your world, so that you understand what that means for you in your world and that you can articulate that to others when it's needed. So the exercise we're about to do is super fun. Well, we're not going to do today, but what I do highly recommend is you download this at brpconsulting.ca/voracious values, and you'll get this exercise that you can do when you feel safe to do so. And what it is you're simply playing. So as I noted, there are literally thousands of values out there. However, there's only a certain amount of space on a PowerPoint presentation with a reasonable size font for you to be able to read. So the values that are listed here are simply a sampling. If one of your values does not appear on this list, use your value because that's more important. And I also want to note that your values do not should all over yourself. And so I had a client and we were doing this exercise with her, and we identified very quickly that her #1 core value was family. However, when we started to look at the other core values, she kept shoulding, saying, I should have community, I should have volunteering, I should. And I stopped this client and I said to her, hey, client, here are my 5 core values, and they are on the screen. So creativity, kindness, significance, independence, and humor. And I said to her, you know me fairly well. Do you think that I don't value my family? To which she burst out laughing because she knows that that's not true. And she's like, no, of course, you absolutely value your family. I said, exactly. The purpose of our core values is that they allow us to show up and be our most full, aligned, best self for those people who matter to us. And so it's not that I don't value my family. It's that if I'm not living in alignment with my own 5 core values, I am a monster of a beast because I'm so misaligned and I simply cannot be there for the people who matter most. So also note that you just play. We're really just playing with our values at the end of the day. We're not here to judge ourselves. And so as you go through this exercise, the first time you do it, you may feel stuck as though it has to be perfect, and it does not have to. You're just playing to begin with. And so what we're doing now is I'm going to walk you through sort of the layout of the exercise, and then I'll give you an example so that you can do this when you are safe to, when you have time to really reflect through, because it can take some time. One client of mine, we did this exercise and she went away and it took her up to 2 weeks. It took her about 2 weeks before she came back to me and said, here are my values. I sat with them every day. I rewrote some of my definitions. So don't feel rushed to do it, and do feel okay going back and editing. Now, the exercise itself is, my core value is X, and you're going to write one of those words from either the list that was there or one of your own values that does not appear on that list. From there, you're going to write, this value is shown in my actions by bloop, 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 and you're going to be writing down what those actions are. Then you're going to create a definition. So my definition of X value is bloop, bloop, bloop. Although bloop, bloop, bloop is going to be filled with actual words. So an actual example is, as I highlighted, one of my personal core values is humor. I love humor. Humor is a huge piece of my life. However, it wasn't really clear until I started to identify what the actions in my life were as to why this was such an important core value of mine. And so when I was starting my own search for what my values were, I really had to dig in. And what was so important to me was that I was very purposeful in looking for the funny in the mundane activities and identifying them and looking for the humor in everyday life. And what I know to be true is that when that starts to disappear, I'm not living in my humor value. I'm not okay. I'm missing something, and I need to go back to the beginning and understand what's going on in my world, what's going on in my mind. Other things that I do that express this humor value is that I'll send uplifting text to my friend, often very funny to myself, but I always get a laughing emoji back. And I also create puns, most likely when I shouldn't, but to me, they're hilarious. And I very, very much am intentional on finding the humor every single day. And I'm purposeful in looking to bring light to the dark and a little bit of levity on hard topics as I go out and I speak on mental health and depression and suicide and self-harm. I speak a lot on these things. but I don't want to make people uncomfortable. So you have to be a little bit humorous, but you cannot make fun of them. So when I was really looking at what these actions and a whole slew of other actions were that, to me, identified this humor value, the definition became very clear. And that definition of humor for me in my world as a value is that I look to bring light to the dark without making light of the dark. And because of that, I'm able to help myself when I feel myself going into depressive slumps by literally using this value. I'm able to support others when they're not okay by listening and bringing a little levity to the heavier times for them, but not ignoring the heavy times. And so this became my definition. This is my definition. So that's the exercise that I highly recommend that you do. Again, the link to download this is brpconsulting.ca/voracious values. And let's keep going because we still got a lot to go through, my friends. So the next part is, okay, so now that you've identified your values, the next is really, well, how in the world then do you actually tie your values to your goals and your boundaries? Because they're so interconnected, but how do you actually connect them if you never have? Well, first and foremost is that you set goals that align with your values. It's pretty straightforward. And the next is you share boundaries to achieve these goals. So a little example on this is back in July 21, I was, as I was completing my neural change method master practitioner certification, we were invited to participate in a 90-day challenge to achieve a very big stretch goal. For me, I had been wanting to transition to become a vegan since 2008. However, in 2008, I made that decision because there was a screwed up story in my head of vegans are skinny. Therefore, if I go vegan, I'll be skinny, which goes very much into my purging background. That was not a good enough reason to try and become vegan. So I stopped. And then over the next few years, I kept trying to go back, but kept failing. In 2017, I tried to make my husband go into this journey with me and failed miserably because that was never going to be one of his goals. And then all of a sudden, when we were invited, I had this aha moment of, there's a reason why this goal has never actually left. And when I think back to why I really wanted to start this journey, it all had to do with my kindness value. And my kindness value's definition is to do what's right, to do what's hard, and to do it with compassionate love. Once I understood that, I knew what that goal was connected to. And since July 21, I have been successfully vegan. I was able to share with my husband, here's what I'm going to do, and here's why I'm doing it. I am not expecting you to do it. Here's how you can support me. Every time I came up against a decision, I had to reflect back and check in with my values daily as to, okay, is this action in alignment with my value of kindness or is it not? And because I had this definition and this foundation of what my values in action were, I was able to say yay or nay very quickly. Now, of course, I misstepped. It took a little while for me to really work out things like cheese and chocolate bars that were my go-to. But when I was able to start saying, okay, this action is misaligned, that's okay. Why did it happen? What do I do now? It was all because I had this foundation to regroup and keep going. And ultimately, what our values do is they make us more compassionate to ourselves when we misstep in our values, because we will. And that is okay because we're human. And not one single person in this world is a perfect human, particularly if we are just starting out on this values in action journey. And the ultimate truth here, is that taking value-based action is not easy. It is hard to do, and you will fail at it. You will fail, and that is okay. Again, because you now understand what your core values in action are and your personal definition of what that said value is, you're able to reflect more quickly and realign more quickly, and then not beat yourself up. From there, because you're just starting on this journey, it is a very intentional choice to start taking action and aligning yourself with your values. And it's important to know that this is going to tick some people off, if not many. And that's because you probably at this point have not necessarily been living in alignment with your values. Therefore, you've been in service of other people in living in their values. Don't beat yourself up. Just know that you're taking something away from them by giving to yourself. And if people are getting ticked off by this, then simply know that these are not your people who support you, who see you, or who truly believe in you. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they're not your people. What's going to be even better, though, is that as you start to take more intentional action via your values, you're going to inspire other people to do the same. These will be the people that come into your life suddenly with opportunity, that want to grow themselves, that want to take actions based in their values. It is a beautiful thing to see your life start to transform once you really start to invest in yourself and taking action for yourself. And then thirdly, the truth is that acting in your values, while it is difficult at first, it becomes so much easier when you use your right values over and over and over again. I mean, like everything, it is a practice. It's just a practice that we are not told about when we're young, because unless we take the time to really dig in and understand what our own personal values are, we will most likely be living the values that were modeled for us as children, that we gained from our parents, the ones that we gained from our teachers, the communities that we were part of, other kids. And when we stop and take our own and live our own values, it just becomes easier. Life becomes easier. Stress does not disappear, but it becomes more easy to move through. When we have a plethora of options that are presented to us, and they all have different roads, we simply pause and say, which one makes the most sense for the values that I have in my life? And all those other values can just go, not values, other decisions fade to the side. So there are some questions to ask yourself. Again, these are in the download, so don't feel that you have to rush writing them down. They are in the download. There are some questions, though, that you can ask yourself to see whether or not you're living your values. One of them is, when you make a decision, note why you made it. Why did you make that decision? What value was this connected to? And this helps to give you more intention with your actions when you're now making decisions moving forward. Next, review your goals. Pretty simple. So, and then ask yourself, are these goals in alignment with my values? And if not, whose are they aligned with? And so, as I mentioned, many people have probably just set their goals January 1st. We're coming to the end of January. Those goals, gone. And that's exactly what happened with a colleague of mine when he himself had set the goal of working out 5 nights a week rather than sitting on the couch and watching TV. And when I connected with him in March of 2020, he shared this with me, and I said, "Oh, that's wonderful. How's that going?" And he simply shared, "Oh, I haven't even started it, but it was a goal that I set January 1st. And I was like, "Oh, okay. Tell me more." And as we went through this conversation, it became very clear that the reason he set this goal was because he wanted to play with his grandkids without being winded. Well, that is very different. He set this goal based on a health value, which up until that point in his life was not important. It was his family value that was pushing him. So we stopped and we said, okay, so if it's just to play with your if it's to play with your grandkids, what will make you get off that couch? And he said, well, he could simply stretch on the floor while still watching TV. And he did that. And I checked with him a couple months later. Now, unfortunately, COVID had happened, so he was not able to actually go and play with his grandkids. However, he had still gotten off the couch and onto the floor to stretch while watching TV every night, rather than just sitting on the couch. And he felt so much better. I think that is a huge demonstration as to why we need to review our goals and see whose values are they in alignment with. And then thirdly, ask yourself, what boundaries do you need to have or already have in place to support you in living your values? More importantly, who do you allow to cross them? Because more often than not, it's our family and our close friends that we allow to cross these boundaries because we love them. That's ultimately not okay. So just ask yourself, who do you allow and why? And how can you then support them in supporting you to get those boundaries in place? Now, there's also some wonderful questions you can ask if you're going out for an interview, if you're looking to work at a specific company, and you want to make sure that they also have some values that are in alignment with yours. Because this often happens to people, is that they get into a company and they find that the values are not very aligned with who they are, and that then creates this huge conflict and can result in higher turnover rates. So ask yourself, I'm like, that did not work. Ask yourself first and foremost, when you are the interviewee, you have as much right to ask questions of the interviewer in that moment, because you're interviewing them just as they are you. So make sure that the people who already work at that company understand what those values are. And so ask them, plain and simply, can you share an example of when a core value was or wasn't lived within this company, and how did the company resolve this? How did they do? The interviewer will then either easily answer that question with a story, or they will stumble, and that will tell you quite a bit. Next, you can also ask, well, dear interviewer, what is your personal definition of this company's value? And then you choose one of the values that are most likely listed on their website. See what they say. Do they even know the definition that the company has, or do they have their own? And then you can also say, well, how have you used this value in action at your company? So that, again, you start getting an understanding of the people who work there, and are they actually living the values of the company that the company purports to have? And then thirdly, you can ask this of the person, is you've had a really fulfilling day. What did you do that made it so fulfilling, and why? And see what they say about how the company supported them in having this fulfilling day. It will tell you so much about the type of culture that you'll be entering, or you can excuse yourself at that point from being considered as a candidate, because there may not be alignment, and that's okay. Now, oh, goodness gracious me. There we go, already Rue. So our values aren't stagnant, with the exception of our one core value, which is our essence, and it's who we are and who we were before the world told us who we're supposed to be. That's a whole other masterclass in and of itself, but our values will change in life because we experience life, and sometimes we change. More often than not, we do change because experiences change us. However, our values themselves are not aspirational. They are who we are in the moment because they're reflected in our actions, and that's how we create that alignment. So values are who we are. They're not who we would like to be. They're not who we think we should be, but who we are in our lives right now. So think of who you are right now in this moment. And the truth is that values, because we haven't really been taught them since we were wee ones, because so many companies that we work for use them as fluffy marketing statements rather than actions, They're so undersold, they're overlooked, and they're just misunderstood. But our values influence our beliefs, which then ultimately influence our mindset and how we are about to go forth. Our values allow us to respond and take a moment to pause, notice, and then choose before we react to a situation. Our values allow us to be so intentional with our behaviors, very clear on what behavior is the right behavior for us. And they allow us to move through those obstacles, again, because life has challenges. Life will always have challenges. Life will always have obstacles. And when we can look back into our values and see what is the right action for me to start getting up and moving forward through this through this challenge, because we know what our internal motivators are within our value, we're able to do so. And then even more, it allows us to ingrain a deeper purpose. Well, I did say you can look to your deeper purpose to start to understand what your values are. Sometimes that is a huge ask. There's so much talk these days around, well, what is purpose? What is your purpose? Do you know it? That's a really big question to ask. And it can be overwhelming. It can be daunting. It can just stop you in your tracks and think, I don't know what my purpose is. How in the heck am I going to find that out? What do I do? Oh my goodness. Pause. And then simply look at what your values are, because your values are so much, not necessarily smaller, but they're actionable. And so long as you're starting to take action that is your value, that's in alignment with your values, over time, your purpose will become much clearer. So if you're struggling trying to find that deeper purpose, look at your values. What lights you up on the inside? What do you love to do? What are those actions that really motivate you? And over time, again, that purpose will become clear. So, as I mentioned, this is the download that has the questions that we walk through along with the exercise itself at brpconsulting.ca/voracious-values. And we are about to go into the lovely Q&A section. So I would love to hear your most valuable takeaway. If you're listening to this at home, please feel free to shoot me an email, because I'd still love to hear what your valuable takeaway is. And you can send that to Lindsay@brpconsulting.ca. Otherwise, thank you. That's all. Thank you.